Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer. It is supposedly Martin Luther King Jr. Day, but that means we're, of course, working on this day. This is not a holiday that Highly Respected celebrates. We should have taken the day or the weekend off for Lee Jackson Day, but a lot of states no longer celebrate Lee Jackson Day. Instead, they celebrate this communist sympathizing, philandering plagiarist who made America a lot worse with his activities. But for whatever reason, a lot of people are off this day, but Highly Respected is not as a point of principle. So you now get a new, great episode that promises to be incredible, like all Highly Respected episodes. And this topic, not going to talk about Martin Luther King at all. There's plenty of resources if you want to read about him, even I've had an IQ supplement on Martin Luther King, so go check that out at highlyrespected.substack.com. It's one of the first IQ supplements. I think it's episode like 4 or 5, but look that up outside of that. But back to the topic at hand. What I'm going to talk about today is a phrase that I introduced last week. I just came up with it. It's not necessarily too creative, but it is something that's very important that I'm seeing a lot among conservatives and the right. And it's not just like mainstream conservatives, it's some people on the dissident right. It's a lot of populist people, pretty much all of populist people. And this phenomenon is what I call as neo-never-Trumpism. Now you might be like, what neo-never-Trumpism? What's the difference between never-Trumpism? The one essential feature, I think a lot of people are seeing that so many of the right-wing Twitter is hostile to Trump now. And you're seeing this from a lot of people who spent all 4 years of Trump's presidency shilling for him. I would say like a really good example is this guy, John Cardillo. He was actually an early Trump supporter. I think he was supporting Trump, at least in the 2016 primaries. And he was a very vocal Trump supporter during the campaign. You can't call him as somebody who is like necessarily a cruise cuck or whatever who just opportunistically went to Trump. This guy was for Trump in the primaries. And this guy was also 4D chess everything that Trump did. Trump could do no wrong. He viciously attacked Jeff Sessions when people like me were defending Jeff Sessions from Trump's attacks. He also supported like Bolton getting hired, saying this is great, and then supported Bolton getting fired. Anything that Trump did, he would support. But now he's on this perspective of, Trump, I'm tired of Trump. He needs to get off the stage and let a real man take control. And that real man, usually people point to, is Ron DeSantis. So there are people like that who are early Trump supporters. Some people just have long-term grievances against Trump. They were Trump supporters at one point in time. They feel that they got burnt by Trump, so now they're very anti-Trump. Thinking of somebody like Ann Coulter. She was a very early Trump supporter, a critical Trump supporter, but her and Trump had a falling out during his presidency, and so she's not a fan of Trump anymore. And then there are people, but most of the people who are neo-never-Trumpers were never-Trumpers in 2016. Most of them were never-Trumpers well into Trump's presidency. But at some point in time, around 2018, 2019, these guys decided that they're national populists and that they are the real deal, that they are the true representatives of what Trumpism is about. And they've always been attacking Conservative Inc. and conservatives' pieties and making fun of the free market worship of National Review and other places. And even though these people are creatures of Conservative Inc., they've decided that they are the vanguard of national populism. And so most of these people never voted for Trump. I'm thinking of like Josh Hammer, Sohrab Ahmari, those type of people. None of them they were all anti-Trump in 2016. Also, not because he was not nationalist enough. It was because he violated conservative orthodoxies. Sohrab Ahmari was attacking Trump for threatening the liberal order and being anti-free market and being a xenophobe. And Josh Hammer was also making similar comments. And Josh Hammer used to describe himself as a conservatarian. I think even into 2018. And so this is like a lot of these people. And also that kid, Saurabh Sharma, who runs American Moment, was never Trump into 2019 and are very hostile to race, to quote unquote racist. Now he's like Mr. Super Base Nationalist. And these people have ruined the term base far before libertarians have now decided to make it even worse. But these are the type of people who are now saying that they're at the forefront of Trumpism or national populism, and they're deciding what it is, and they are all very anti-Trump. And they want to get rid of Trump because they feel that Trump, unlike Never Trumpers in 2016, who hated Trump for violating the dictates of conservatism and being a phony conservative, and them saying he's a fake conservative. Now these neo-Never Trumpers, they say Trump is bad because he's not a true populist. He's a failed nationalist. He violates the dictates of populism. And so some of these same people who in 2016 were arguing about Trump and decrying his lack of piety to free market orthodoxy, or him not being, a true believer in freedom. There were several National Review and I think even Federalist hit pieces about how Trump didn't talk about freedom enough, and him also being a threat because he's a non-interventionist. All these arguments that were conservative Inc. repeats, they're now trying to do this with a populist angle, with it's like saying Trump failed to implement anything with his presidency. He didn't do anything in his presidency. When it comes to immigration, he didn't do anything. They'll always say that, or he, didn't do anything about the deep state and the liberal order. He didn't do enough attacking the liberal order. And they use all these arguments to go against him. And two of the more popular ones that they're going on right now is vaccines and Julian Assange, which is very funny about the Julian Assange one, because I pointed this out on Twitter. I said, most of the people who are complaining about Trump from the perspective of he's a failure and he's not a real populist, they spent all of Trump's presidency shilling for Rick Grinnell and working with Arthur Schwartz and all these people. And these guys are more responsible for arresting Julian Assange than anyone else in Trump's administration. And they are responsible for ensuring Julian Assange didn't get a pardon. So they're complaining that that Trump didn't pardon Julian Assange. And this is why they can't vote for him, because people that they supported and promoted throughout Trump's presidency told him not to do this. And some of these people still promote Arthur Schwartz and Rick Grinnell. It's particularly Rick Grinnell. And you're like, what? We're not supposed to notice that, but it's a common theme among a lot of these people. And it's also they're trying to expect that the base is going to respond to Trump not pardoning Julian Assange. Now, he should have pardoned Julian Assange. I think that would have been the right thing to do. But the reality is that nobody cares about pardoning Julian Assange except for a small cohort on the internet. And the people who really, really care about it or people like Roger Waters, like the guy from Pink Floyd, Glenn Greenwald, some maybe not even the InfoWars crowd. I don't even think really cares about it. It's these type of old school lefties who were into 9/11 truth in the 2000s and into all these conspiracy theories. And people who actually voted for Tulsi Gabbard, who are the ones who really care about this. Now, that is, some of those people are Trump supporters, and there's some genuine Trump supporters who deeply care about this. And I would say it is an important issue, and that Trump should have pardoned him. But it doesn't connect with his real base. Most of his voters probably don't know who Julian Assange is. They may vaguely remember Julian Assange, but they don't give a shit. They don't care about Julian Assange. And that's not going to sway them one way or the other. Now, when it comes to vaccines, this is an important attack on Trump. I think this could have a lot of potential troubles with his base. Because his base is, very skeptical of the vaccines, to put it mildly. They hate the mandates. They do not want these vaccines at all. They hate the government telling them to get the vaccines and promoting it. And Trump is, of course, promoting the vaccines because he feels it's his accomplishment that the liberal media is not giving him. And the liberal media loves these vaccines. And he's like, look, I'm responsible for this. I've gotten it. Why doesn't everyone else? Well, he's trying to speak to more of the media here, but the base is getting, a little flustered by his continued advocacy of the vaccines. But he is not. At the end of the day, all their other options are also vaxxed, and promoting the vaccines. Because, like, if you look at Ron DeSantis throughout the year, he's like, we love the vaccine. I'm giving him too much of a Southern accent. I'm going to work on my Ron DeSantis impression. But he is just saying, we've got the vaccines. We love the vaccines. But, he'll imitating Trump's mannerisms, with his hands and reading from the note cards. He'll say that we're opposed to the mandates, which is the general, position of the Republican Party and the average Republican voter base. Or a lot of them is, they're pro-choice, so to speak, on the vaccine, with some being more hostile to the vaccine. But they're pretty much, all of them are opposed to the mandate. And so that's the way middle ground of doing this. But some people are, saying that Trump needs to adopt this anti-vax position. And a lot of these populist people who are advocating for this were pro-vax or vaccinated and boosted themselves. And even some of them are trying to take this angle of attacking Trump for having a lockdown. And there was some of that last week because there's a lot more news articles talking about Trump versus DeSantis. Because, Trump had, gave an interview, I think, with One America News, where he made a thinly veiled attack on DeSantis, saying, there are gutless politicians who won't say that they're boosted, just say that they've got the booster shot, likely referring to DeSantis because DeSantis doesn't want to admit that he got the booster shot. And then DeSantis later in the week was doing a podcast interview where he was attacking Fauci for the lockdowns and saying that he should have opposed the lockdowns earlier on when Fauci was advocating for it. And then the media ran with it and said that he was attacking Trump, which DeSantis' own spokesperson came out and said, no, this was against Fauci. This had nothing to do with Trump. Showing that DeSantis' people fear an open breach with Trump, which is very funny considering their, his online fan base thinks this is the greatest idea ever to go on and become full-on anti-Trump in 2022 ahead of the midterms. I'll get to that in a moment on the political wisdom of that. But so there's this Tiff, and they're going on about the lockdown. But a lot of these populist people then took that as this is so right. Trump is responsible for the lockdown. So they have to remember is that the reason why Trump got even into the lockdowns is because Tucker Carlson flew down to Florida and met him at Mar-a-Lago and begged him to take COVID seriously. And most of the right was full on supportive of the lockdowns, especially a lot of these populist people who are now attacking Trump over the lockdowns of the vaccine. And also a lot of the populist people need to admit that one of their intellectual gurus, Adrian Vermeule, the Harvard law professor who's Mr. Integralist, Vermeule supports, and they always making these attacks on Trump and conservatives for being originalists, and supporting that constitutional theory. And they're we need common good constitutionalism. Well, the guy behind common good constitutionalism is supportive of vax mandates and wants to make them more extensive, and is also a fan of the lockdowns. But for whatever reason, Trump, following the consensus of populists at the time, supported the lockdowns against his own instincts, because you have to remember is that Trump, is blamed for all these COVID deaths because, and the media always wants to blame him for this stuff, is that in early March, he was saying, this isn't that big of a deal. Let's not ruin our economy for this. And then he was attacked so viciously, and all these populists came up and it's you've got to take this seriously. We need the lockdown. And then he reluctantly was into the lockdown, wasn't and was more pushing to open up, especially more so than a lot of other Republican governors, with the exceptions of Kristi Noem and possibly, Ron DeSantis. And I think the South Carolina governor as well. There was a few others who, there was a few others who were beginning to, break free in April. But some of these guys aren't very good. Like Brian Kemp in Georgia was another one who wanted to end the lockdowns. And Trump is more like his administration. He's listening to these populists being no, we need the lockdowns forever. And they weren't fully convinced that the lockdowns were stupid until the George Floyd riots, when all these people without masks, all congregated together, were allowed to rampage throughout American cities. And then all the scientists and the experts were saying about how this is great. They're fully protected from COVID because they're protesting racism, which is a public health crisis just as much as COVID. And then everyone realized how stupid it was to continue on the lockdown policies. So you really can't blame Trump for this. I mean, this is all the people who are attacking him for this were also supportive of the lockdowns for the most part. The only people who were really anti-lockdowns in the beginning were like boomer conservatives, or people like Jesse Kelly and Dan Patrick, the lieutenant governor of Texas, and like very few others. They were a minority position, but all of Populist Inc. I mean, they were taking cues from Tucker. I mean, Tucker's great. This is not an attack on Tucker. I'm just pointing this in context of this, but like Tucker was like a leader on like COVID, taking it deadly serious, and he was even advocating for, attacking liberals for not having extensive mask advice in like April, if I recall correctly. So, Trump's own instincts were telling him that this is wrong, and he went along with it. So it's not really an attack that you can have against him. But all these people are scrambling for attack options against Trump, or ways to diminish his support. So a lot of these people, as I said, are vaccine boosted themselves, and got it, and we're celebrating the vaccine earlier this year, are now being like, I am so outraged that Trump would advocate for the vaccine as I just scheduled my booster shot. A lot of this is bad faith. Some of these people, like I said, I understand a lot of the disgruntlement, I guess, or disappointment, and a lot of the outrage over Trump, and some of the anger over Trump's like advocating for the vaccine in a way that's much more similar and much more forthright than any other Republican. And and some people will say it's resembling what the Democrats are saying. But on the most important issue, which is the mandate, Trump is still opposed to the mandate, which is what matters the most. You can just ignore him on the vaccine. And then, like, as I said before, every Republican politician who's going to run for president has the vaccine. They are vaxxed, and they have advocated at one point in time getting the vaccine. DeSantis is trying to cynically use this as a way to move up and elevate his star power, because he knows the base is not really into this. But he himself is vaxxed and very well likely boosted as well. So it is like an odd thing to attack him in the 2023 primary, and 2024 primary, but it's going to be starting up in 2023 likely. And I don't know if the way that we're having the COVID debate and COVID fight right now is going to be exactly the same. So you could be necessarily like anti-vax now, but there's like now another completely different issue in 2023 or 2024, or the issue has just disappeared entirely, and people are, harping on something that happened in 2022 or 2021 that now people, a year or two later, they just don't care about. And it's very hard, never overestimate the memory of voters. Voters forget about stuff all the time. There were so many things that happened during Trump's presidency that people said, he's finished. He's done, for both reasons. Like people saying he upset moderates for doing something like getting impeached, or him, calling African countries shitholes, or locking up kids in cages, doing all these things. They said that alienated moderates. Didn't necessarily do it to the extent that people thought that he's like finished. And then people on the populist side thought that various things had finished him, like the Syria strikes. Nobody remembered the Syria strikes at all, except for a few people on right-wing Twitter. Failing to do various things he had promised, or it's mainly related to foreign policy things that a lot of the base either supported or just didn't care about. And people would say that that's what matters. And now we're stuck to what, a lot of the bad things that Trump did, people forget and didn't matter to voters. So now they're on to new things, which is, vaccines, failure to, deliver on his populist agenda or whatever that these people in 2016 and 2017 and most of 2018 opposed. Or, it's failure to to pardon Julian Assange. They're just trying to find things to make people upset with. And it's not like Ron DeSantis is going to get in there and pardon Julian Assange. Like, that's probably the least likely Republican to do that. If the opponent was Ron or Rand Paul, I would understand that argument. And because, there's a great chance that if Rand Paul ever became president, which he's not going to become president, would pardon Julian Assange, but he's not. And even with the vaccine stuff, I don't think Rand Paul got the vaccine. So it would also make sense if Rand Paul was the one running against Trump, but he's also not running for president and he's not the opponent. And also most of the populace hates his other beliefs, when it comes to free market and his idea of how to solve tech censorship, which he just believes is using, alternatives like Gitter or Parler. Doesn't ever suggest Gab. And that's like the way to deal with tech censorship. He doesn't want a government solution. And going to numerous other policies that Populist is into, they don't like him. But they pretend like the two main issues that I see the most complaints about on Twitter, they imagine that he's running against Rand Paul. And it's like, no, he's running against Ron DeSantis, who's on the same page on both these issues. And he would never even consider a pardon for Julian Assange. There's a potential that if Trump got into the White House again, that he would pardon Julian Assange and these other people. There is no chance that Ron DeSantis would do that. But neo never Trumpers are salivating at the idea of Ron DeSantis running. They were so excited by this reported tiff between Trump and DeSantis. And there's a lot of articles about this. There's a really good Axios article about Trump complaining about DeSantis, where he said he's like, he has no charisma and he's a dull personality. Which is true. I mean, I want to always say this about DeSantis. DeSantis is governing the way you would pretty much want most Republican governors to govern their states. That's what we want. But in terms of elevating him to the position of the leader or the guy we want to be president, when we still have Trump around, who is way more exciting, who has better instincts. The one thing you have to realize about DeSantis is a politician. DeSantis is saying these things because he feels that this will elevate his political career. It will further advance his political career, which is good, but these are not based on his instincts. And if you watch Trump's rally in Arizona, it was great. It was full on 2016 energy going on. He was making a lot of base comments, making funny jokes. It was riling up the crowd in a way that Ron DeSantis couldn't. And there's one thing, all these people complain about Trump, but Trump actually talked about anti-white racism explicitly at his rally. And he was doing this in the way of how the medical industry and these states are discriminating against whites when it comes to COVID treatment. And there are several examples of this in Minnesota, I think Utah, New York, and a couple of other cities and a couple of other medical hospitals, individual hospitals doing this, where they ration treatment based on race. If you're, and Tucker Carlson has talked about this, if you're a Haitian immigrant who just came over, you would be prioritized over a white senior citizen under these conditions. And Trump called this out. He said that this is anti-white. They're denigrating white people. This is anti-white discrimination. And that's a very base comment. That's our keyed comment. I always fail to say, I need to make sure I always say keyed instead of base. This is something that's saying, people are like, oh, it's just rhetoric, blah, 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 rhetoric. But with DeSantis, a lot of this is just rhetoric too. People always like to say that DeSantis is getting things done, but most of what people is okay, what is he getting done? Outside of COVID mandate, outside of the COVID lockdowns, which he did do a lot of cool things with that, I will give him that. What do you think, substantially he has done as governor that Trump didn't do? And they'll just say, well, he got mandatory E-Verify. Okay, that's nice, but Trump, through executive actions and through his personality that he got in his last 2 years, was able to reduce legal immigration significantly over his time. And you can look at, I've tweeted in the past, showing the graphs of legal immigration. Legal immigration was declining well before COVID. Now, he could have done, some more on that, but through what he could do, through the power of the executive office, he was doing that through these tough policies that he had implemented. And even on illegal immigration, he was doing a lot on on making it harder for illegal immigrants to come here and punishing them through family separation and other ways that created a deterrent for illegal immigrants to come here. And these are things that like actual accomplishments. And you can see that like the Trump difference between what we have now with Joe Biden, where people believe that there was going to be no difference between him and Trump, and we're seeing a massive invasion at the border. You know, hundreds of thousands of immigrants come here migrants come here through the border every month. You know, they're hitting record levels that they've never seen before, and these record levels are going to keep going for this entire year and probably for throughout Biden's presidency. And you see the Trump effect. You know, there wasn't that there. And there were some other accomplishments too, even when it comes to foreign policy. Like people always want to complain about the Syrian strikes and whatnot. But think about this, if like Hillary Clinton or another Republican had been in office, do you think we would have been as level-headed and as non-interventionists? I don't think so. I think we would have gotten into another conflict, or we would have increased our presence in Syria, and they may even try to take Assad out in Syria or gotten us into another stupid conflict. So there's some stuff to say about that when people are always like, well, DeSantis gets things done, and it's like, well, what substantially has he gotten done? And then they'll just point to his rhetoric in the same way that, you know, I'm pointing to Trump's rhetoric, and Trump's rhetoric is much better than DeSantis's right now. Except for when it comes to the mandates, I will give that DeSantis is better on that, but I think Trump's going to come around to it. He's going to realize that it's bad for his base, and he's going to speak more forcefully against the mandates, which he was even doing at his rally over the weekend. So I don't, you know, you're looking at the statements, like the fact that he was talking about anti-white racism shows that his instincts are still better than any Republican leader, and he's more exciting, more dynamic, and more capable of doing things outside the box than any other Republican politician. You're essentially, you know, with all of Trump's failures and stuff, like nobody's under any illusion that he's perfect or he's, you know, the caudillo or any of these type of things. But when you compare to everyone else, he is much better than them, and he has more potential to do great things and do things that, as I said, outside the box than any other Republican. I think you would get a standard Republican administration without the good instincts, without the great rhetoric, without the excitement of a Trump administration, and without the potential to do things that are well beyond the normal conservative Inc. parameters. I think that's what you would get with DeSantis, but you have at least the chance of doing something, of shaking up the system, shaking up the status quo with Trump. And that's why I've always been, or I'm pro-Trump for 2024. It is early now, but I think Trump is going to, if he runs, there's still a chance he may not run. As I've said before, there are two ways that could happen that prevent him from running. For one, he has so many, there are particular legal troubles that may prevent him from running, even though I feel like if he's like under indictment and he's, you know, there's still a legal way for him to run, he's going to be more likely to run, or he has some health problem develop. He is in his, I think he is turning 76 this year. So, I mean, that is likely at that age. So there are two things that could potentially stop him from running. But by all accounts, everything I'm hearing, he's running again. And he's going to win the primary. Like as I've said, his main hurdle is, you know, not his temperament or his supposed failures in office. It's the fact that he is banned from social media. He is banned from YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. You know, this is very tough to run a presidential campaign on that matter, but this is not, you know, and there's all these people saying like, well, this other person, you know, DeSantis or Josh Hawley would be the real threat to the system because they get things done. Well, they're still allowed on social media. You know, if you're a real threat to the system, they're more likely to ban you. You know, that's my impression, even though I'm not banned. So maybe, but I would say from a politician perspective, they ban people who they deem as threats. If you're wanting to run a campaign that still, you know, follows big tech's guidelines, but is supposedly going to bring them all down and bring the whole system down, you know, versus the guy who's a fake threat, but yet he is banned by big tech and the entire system considers him the number one threat, you know, you have to wonder, it's like, that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. We'll have to see what happens with that, but I mean, Trump is going to run, and here's what's going to happen. I don't think DeSantis is stupid enough to run against Trump in 2024. This is who the neo-never-Trumpists want the most. I mean, whether you're a mainstream conservative at National Review or you're supposedly an edgy, dissident, right-wing thinker who just came to these ideas in 2019, you are all wanting DeSantis. That is your preferred candidate for 2024. And all these people hate Trump. They've wanted to get rid of Trump for years and years and years. They've changed their reasons for why they hate Trump. I mean, they're no longer talking about free markets or freedom or liberty or William F. Buckley said this, and this is why Trump can't run, or whatever, or Ronald Reagan. They're no longer trying to counter Trumpism with zombie Reaganism. They're now trying to counter their own version of Trumpism that is bereft of all the things that they didn't like about Trumpism. It's like, oh, I don't like the stuff that sounds racism. I don't like the WWE theatrics. Oh, that doesn't suit well with me. And I don't like my neighbors thinking I'm one of those gross Trump supporters. I'll say to them, oh, I hate Trump because he wasn't a true populist. I like DeSantis, and maybe they'll invite me over for dinner again. This is their type of thing. It's now no longer, they're countering their own version of Trumpism against Trump. And it's now based on economic populism. It's now centered on being a respectable, immigration restriction. It's like it's devoid of racism, and it's working to ensure we have a multicultural, multiracial working class. This is what Trump is. This is what real national populism is all about. And that's what they're trying to counteract. It's not zombie Reaganism anymore as what they did in 2016. But the goal is the same. They want to get rid of Trump. They think that supporting him is disreputable and it makes them look bad to their liberal neighbors and ensures that they're not invited over for dinner and that they make fun of them behind their back, and they don't want to lose their respectability, and then everyone in the office is like, oh, there's that Trump supporter. Or, most of these guys are not, working at the National Review office or whatever, but, theoretically speaking, they would say that. And so that's why they want to get rid of Trump. But, DeSantis, there's definitely people who are going to be pushing him to do this. Christina Pashaw, his spokeswoman, is friends with all these people, and all these never Trumpists met with DeSantis, I believe last week. Politico wrote an article about it. It was Josh Hammer, Dave Rubin, Dave Reboy, all these types of people who a lot of them spend a lot of time hating on Trump on Twitter and saying he failed to be national populist. They met with DeSantis. All those types of people are going to be pushing for DeSantis to run, and so are the mainstream conservatives, because they really want to get rid of Trump, and they really truly believe that DeSantis can beat Trump. But these same people, because you got to remember, both populist Inc. and conservative Inc., all those populist Inc. and conservative Inc. people were never Trump in the primary. For the most part, there are a few exceptions. And they all thought that Trump would not win a primary. You have to remember is how bad conservative commentary was in 2015 and 2016. They thought that every damn thing Trump said ended his presidency or ended his candidacy. They would say, oh, when he called for the Muslim ban, he's over, he's done. And then he rose in the polls. He said this mean comment about Megyn Kelly. He's done, he's finished. He rose in the polls. Even when he said, made fun of John McCain, they're like, he's finished. He's done in the polls. And then he rose again. And then people were saying that, him not winning the Iowa primary, him coming, I think he came in second. If I recall correctly, it's oh, he's finished, he's done. We've slayed the Trump beast. And then he went on to win the New Hampshire primary. And then their commentary got worse and worse and worse. And all they could do is just foam at the mouth and just promise that anyone who says anything nice about Trump is going to get purged. And even I'm seeing this stuff. I saw even people who were hardcore never Trumpers in 2016, Matt Lewis, who's this terrible idiot who I had to work with at the Daily Caller. And now he's even getting into Trump failed to deliver national populism. And and he attacked Jeff Sessions, and I was I remember you saying his whole campaign is National Socialism, is fascism, and you having a meltdown when Jeff Sessions endorsed Trump and just showing how this shows that Jeff Sessions is a racist, and now you're trying to defend Jeff Sessions' honor against Trump. And these are the type of people. It's a lot of bad faith arguments done by opportunists who just want to get rid of Trump. And so all these people had terrible opinions about the 2016 primary, and they also encourage, I remember them, all these types of people encouraging Marco Rubio to get in the dirt with Trump and make fun of him too. They're like, Marco Rubio, make fun of his hands. And then when Marco Rubio made fun of Trump's hands, they're like, Trump is finished. Trump is done. And then, of course, Super Tuesday happened and he won most of the states in Super Tuesday. And all these conservatives are like, wow, Marco Rubio attacking his hands. That was a brilliant idea. And then like a week later, Marco Rubio is having to drop out. I think, or a week or 2 weeks later, like Rubio's out after doing this. Like it didn't work at all. And so, the same people are wanting DeSantis to get in a mudslinging contest with Trump. It's going to be the same thing that happened with Rubio and these other contenders who tried a new strategy to bring down Trump, and Trump instead brought them down. And with DeSantis does have these problems. Like he is a dull personality. He doesn't have charisma. He has to rehearse his attack lines. He has to look at notes and stuff. So it's a little wooden. It's very forced, articulation of these things if you try to get insults with Trump. In a lot of ways, it's worse than Rubio. Rubio also had to rehearse these lines, but he was pretty good at delivering them. DeSantis is not that great at delivering them. He can remember this stuff, but it always comes off as a little inauthentic and not as great as you could say as somebody Trump. But Trump's just off the cuff. Like Trump will just make fun of anybody, and he loves making fun of somebody. He knows how to get under people's skin. He knows weak points. He knows how to drive people really up the wall and really get under their and irritate their nerves and just really upset them. And he also can just say things about people that people were like, oh, I never even thought about that. But that's true. I think one of the funniest in the 2016 primary is when he made fun of the way of how John Kasich ate his food. And he's like, look at how he eats his food. It's so disgusting. I can't believe it. And then these reporters are looking at it. It's like him eating calzones and stuff. And like, this is weird how he's eating. This is kind of disgusting. It's just so low down. Or him making fun of Carly Fiorina's face. Another thing that supposedly ended his campaign. People are like, look at that face. There's something there. He's going to find the weak points about DeSantis that his fans are and people who like DeSantis aren't really thinking about, and they're going to get it in the mind. And DeSantis does not have the charisma or the star power or the standing to go toe-to-toe with Trump. And unlike in 2016, Fox News is all on Trump's side, and so are all he has way more support than he did in 2016. They view him as the fallen king who in the primary in the 2024 election, he's going to be the return of the king coming to reclaim his crown that was wrongfully taken from him. It's a much stronger storyline, and some of these people may be like, well, Trump's kind of old, maybe it might be better, but once they see him on stage against DeSantis and noticing getting under DeSantis' skin and entertaining people with all the problems about DeSantis and I didn't think about that, and then they'll think less of DeSantis. And not only this, the dumbest thing about DeSantis is that Trump forgave a lot of the people who attacked him in 2016. And some of these people came into his administration, and a lot of those people who were super cheerleaders for Trump during his administration are now attacking Trump. But he will likely not forgive those who run against him in 2024 because he feels that it is his right to be the candidate, and he is not going to be happy with anybody who runs against him. And he's not going to forgive Ron DeSantis if he runs. And DeSantis, is a smart political, he's very smart. He is smart. He knows what wise political decisions to take. That's why he's saying all the right things right now. That's getting a lot of what conservatives care about, interested in him. He knows what to say, and he knows what is a smart political calculation. If he runs against Trump in 2024, he will lose. And not only will he lose, he will ensure that he will never be a serious presidential candidate again, because Trump will have an everlasting grudge against him and will never endorse him and will always condemn him and attack him if he ever runs again. So if he tries again in 2028 or 2032, maybe Trump will still be around. Trump will be really old. He'll be turning 86 in 2032. Hopefully Trump is still around. But if he tries to run again in the years after 2024, he's going to have to deal with Trump hating him and Trump getting all of his devoted supporters to be anti-DeSantis. And DeSantis is rising by appealing to the Trump base. But if the Trump base is turned against him, and if he's ostracized from Trump world and considered a traitor, which would happen if he runs in 2024 and loses, it's not going to be a good scenario. And also, Trump is not going to accept a loss very well, too. He's going to see that it's like a rigged. I don't. He's not going to lose. I don't. I think it'd be if somebody ran against him in a primary, it'd be very stupid. But even if he did somehow lose, he's also not going to support that candidate. He's not going to support that candidate, and Republican parties actually would lose the general election because he would just not support the candidate, and he'd say it's a rigged system, and he would demand that he has priority in the primary. So it's a terrible political calculation. It's a huge risk for DeSantis, and even if he somehow did win, Trump is not going to endorse him. And there's going to be a sizable contingent of the Republican Party that's not going to support him, or Republican voters who are not going to support him. So he may not even become president anyway. But he wouldn't win in a head-to-head contest with Trump, despite what all these pundits on Twitter say. And they made wrong predictions in 2016. They made wrong predictions in 2020, and they've been wrong about a lot of things. But for some reason, people keep listening to them. And he's just not gonna. He just doesn't have that opportunity to win. And a head-to-head contest, he would lose. You can look at the polling right now. Trump has like over 50% support. And in a head-to-head contest with DeSantis is usually behind Pence on presidential favorites. And Pence has no political future. I mean, Pence has no chance of winning. Even if Trump didn't run, he has no chance of winning. But if you look, it's like, Trump at least 50% support, DeSantis like 10% or 11% support at most. And he's not likely to increase that by more. So I don't think he's dumb enough to run. I don't think he's going to run. He may be delusional enough to run, but he will seal he will doom his political career unless for some reason Trump forgives him. But I don't think Trump's going to forgive those who run against him in 2024. But Populist Inc. is not going to accept Trump as the nominee. It's going to take a while for a lot of them to do this. I think by the time of 2024, that it's like obvious that there's going to be nobody. They're going to grudgingly go back to supporting Trump. Some of these people who are very anti-Trump right now are going to turn back into being Trump cheerleaders for the primary. But a lot of them are also going to get this, like anything bad that happens to Trump, or there's like some devastating news story, or you say something that they don't like, they're always going to do this, like, it's time to drop out, Trump. It's time to move aside. They're going to be tweeting that. It's the same way that conservatives were doing in 2016, that anytime there's bad news that happened, like the grab him by the pussy comment, they're like, it's time for Trump to drop out. And then like a few weeks later, they're like, I love Trump. I can't wait to vote for him. It's like, you were just saying you should drop out like a week or two ago. And then after the campaign, when he won the election, they're like, I love Trump. He is the greatest president ever, And so there was many examples of that. But I think a lot of these populist people will do that throughout the 2024 campaign if Trump is the nominee. But there's going to be this process of that happening. And throughout 2022, they're still going to believe DeSantis is going to run, or some other candidate, maybe Hawley. Hawley said he's not going to run. I don't think Hawley's going to run. I don't think they're going to gravitate to Hawley. It's going to be mostly probably DeSantis, or I don't think any of them really want Pompeo. Pompeo could run, but Pompeo's also makes smart political calculations. He's not an idiot. I don't think he's going to run against Trump, but he's putting it out there. Tom Cotton, they could also rally around. I think Tom Cotton is dumb enough to run, and Tom Cotton would get destroyed. The only other people who are really confident to run is like Chris Christie, which some populist people are saying he's a serious candidate. I'm like, are you? It's like, you're not a serious person if you think Chris Christie's going to do anything. And then there's like Liz Cheney, Mitt Romney, Larry Hogan. It's like very anti-Trump people who may run. But here's what's most likely going to happen. I think Tom Cotton probably will realize that it's not a good idea to run, and he won't run. I think the same is going to be for Pompeo and for some others, and for DeSantis as well. And those are probably the people and Hawley is definitely not going to run. And Rubio might be stupid enough to run, but I don't think so. I'm also hearing names that like people are like Populist is going to have a hard time accepting. Like Rick Scott is definitely going to run. I'm like, Rick Scott has less charisma than DeSantis. And he's bald. Like that's not gonna. He's going to not do well against Trump. But I think he would realize that running against Trump is going to be bad. So what's going to happen is they're going to have all these candidates. in 2022, they're going to be hyping up DeSantis the whole time. Is like, he's the Trump killer. He's who we really want. He's who we want. This is who we're going to be. And then when it gets time to Trump announcing sometime after the 2022 midterms, possibly early 2023, DeSantis is going to get cold feet, and DeSantis and his people are going to be encouraging this throughout 2022. But once it comes time to actually, seeing Trump declare his candidacy and seeing the support he's going to get and how daunting the prospects are and how his political future is likely over if he runs against him, he's not going to run. And it's going to take some time for these people for Populist to realize that DeSantis is not going to run. And it'll probably set in sometime in spring of 2023 that he's not going to run. So then they're going to look at the other people who are running against Trump and who they're going to support. And, I don't think Pompeo's going to run. I don't think Cotton's going to run. Those are some people that they would probably support. I think Cotton especially would be somebody that they would gravitate towards if he ran. But I don't think they're going to run. It could, but the people who are most likely to run that they're going to gravitate and support in 2023, depending on how deranged they are and upset they are about Trump, the two people that are going to support are going to be Chris Christie and Mitt Romney, because they'll find rationales of like, well, Chris Christie has a populist air to him. He's a pugilist. Like he knows how to bring it, and he's got a New Jersey working class vibe. They'll figure out ways to say this, and then Chris Christie will probably hire somebody that's sort of affiliated with Populist to advise his campaign, and he'll adopt some of their positions, and they'll be like, Chris Christie is our guy. And Chris Christie's going to go nowhere. I mean, Chris Christie's time to run was in 2012, and he trying to run 12 years later, it doesn't really work like that. And then some of them may gravitate towards Mitt Romney because Mitt Romney's a pro-natalist. He's supporting family policies. And even Mitt Romney on immigration is pretty good. I mean, if you looked, he was like one of the leaders against attacking Democrat amnesty plans. But I think his style and substance and who he is will probably dissuade some populist people. But I could see like Sohrab Ahmari and the more the American Affairs type people, the more kind of intellectual types liking Mitt Romney more than Chris Christie. So they'll gravitate towards these two people who are likely candidates. Then they'll lose. They'll looking at the poll numbers, and throughout 2023, they'll be supporting these guys, and they won't let the polls dissuade them. Some of the populist people will see the writing on the wall and be like, okay, I'll go with Trump. And then when 2024 rolls around, they'll see their candidates get destroyed in the primaries and whoever they support. And then most of Populist Inc. will go to Trump. But there will be a few holdouts who are hate Trump so much with a burning passion for whatever reason. A lot of these people are the ones who most say that he betrayed, and they tweet about like Trump like he's he's an ex-girlfriend who jilted them, or an ex-lover who jilted them and broke up with them, and they're just so over him. They're just so over him that they have to keep tweeting about him so much. And these people are going to stay anti-Trump. And now what happens with them is an interesting thing. Is like, do they link up with Never Trumpers, or do they stay isolated and totally marginalized from the political sphere? And that's something, I mean, it's like the funny thing is like some of these people, you could see them like merging with like Wignats, or you could see them merging with like the Bulwark. I mean, it's like the complete opposite sides of the political spectrum. You could see those holdouts doing in 2024. And I think some of them may just decide that they're going to support like the Constitution Party candidate and thinking that this is like their will way, or just say like I'm post political or whatever. But there are going to be some holdouts. But most of the populace will then turn to Trump support, and then sometimes they'll be like, I can no longer support Trump after whatever some new controversy or something that Trump said. But by the time of the election, they'll vote for Trump. And a lot can happen in 2 years, especially with the crazy timeline we live in. But that's the trajectory I see of Never Trump, or the neo-Never Trumpists, is that 2022, they're extremely anti-Trump. They're hyped up for Ron DeSantis. 2023, no DeSantis. Trump announces. They gravitate towards whatever candidates are out there. I think it'd be most likely Mitt Romney and Chris Christie. Maybe maybe Tom Cotton. or maybe somebody else that we may not know, or we may be surprised by who they pick, or maybe even Marco Rubio. A lot of populist people really like Marco Rubio now, which should show you about how, which should show populist true colors, but a lot of people still aren't connecting that. And throughout 2023 will be promoting these people, whoever are running against Trump. But a few of them will realize that this is a bad idea, and they'll go to Trump. And Trump's not going to forgive people is going to be much less forgiving of those who are supporting his enemies in 2024 than he did in 2016. And then in 2024, these people get crushed in the primaries by Trump. And then never Trumpists, most of them support Trump grudgingly, and they will sometimes hop off the Trump train due to whatever controversies happen. But there will be a few holdouts who will never support Trump, and they will either link up with never Trumpers or Wignats, depending on or they may just remain independent. Who knows what will happen to them? And all these people will go back to being Trump supporters. And then if Trump wins, a lot of these people who are viciously tweeting about Trump and tweeting about Trump like they're jilted, like he broke up with them in a bad relationship or whatever, will then go back to being Trump cheerleaders during the Trump presidency. So that's my predictions for what never Trumpism is about. And I think this is like a phenomenon that people need to recognize for what this is. This is never Trumpism rebranding as authentic, new, strong national populism but the goal is the same. It's to get rid of Trump. It's to get rid of things that are really shaking up the status quo and threaten conservatives' respectability. And an underlying desire for never Trumpism is the fact that Trump is so disreputable, and their liberal friends and their neighbors hate Trump so much that they need another candidate support so they're not ostracized from their social circles, or they can say that they're more reputable and respectable, and they don't have to worry about getting censored from social media. And they could be shown as oh, this is a cool, interesting populist, but he's not an idiot like Trump. And that's why a lot of them gravitate toward Trump. But even if they're using these arguments about saying that Trump failed populism and that's why I oppose Trump's presidency, versus in 2016 as Trump is not an authentic conservative, that's why I oppose Trump's presidency, it's all the same. And it's all pretty stupid, and it's much dumber this time because Trump is clearly, if he runs, he's going to win the primary. And there's no real other alternative to Trump that could run that would be better than Trump. I mean, some people want to say Tucker Carlson, but Tucker Carlson is not going to run. He's especially not going to run against Trump. Tucker is a smart person. He's not a politician. I don't think he's ever dreamed of being a president. I don't think Tucker doesn't want to be president based on what I know about him. And so that's I don't think that's gonna happen, but that's the only other person you could theoretically say it could be equal or better to Trump. So Trump is the guy. Trump is still the leader. I think it's a much more compelling narrative to have Return of the King as the 2024 theme than the new guy on the block, who's the new blood, and it's a much boring, respectable, and less exciting, less mimetic, less, willing to shake up the status quo in the system version of Trumpism as the replacement of Trump. That's not as good of a narrative as Return of the King. So that's what we're going to see. So we're going to see a lot of never Trumpism in 2022. You're going to see all these people who, were testing the waters in 2021 about attacking Trump are going to be repeating the same vitriol that was targeted at Trump in 2015 and 2016. And now they're going to adopt that, but they're going to be from a base position, and you're going to see a lot more people do this. But the one thing, there's a lot of reasons to show how dumb this is, and there's not that this is only limited to Twitter, is that one, Trump, anytime that they poll, he has over 50% of Republican support, as I mentioned before. Two, no candidate is wanting to run as an anti-Trumper. Every good candidate is draping themselves in Trumpism and saying how much they support Trump and are begging for Trump's endorsement. If Trump was finished, if the future was Ron DeSantis, they would be doing this for Ron DeSantis. They would be begging for Ron DeSantis' endorsement and begging for his support. And some candidates in Florida are doing that. but not to the extent that they're doing with Trump. Trump is still the center focus of the party. You can see this in every primary throughout the country where every candidate is saying that they're the genuine Trump supporter and are begging for Trump's endorsement. That's the power of Trump's appeal still to average Republican voters, and the fact that he's not a president and can still attract thousands and thousands of people to rallies. You know, people are going to be begging for rallies in their state in order to get voters. So that's not the case with Ron DeSantis. And even if Ron DeSantis chose to run in 2024, he would not get the type of rallies that Trump gets in an off year when there's no elections for a while. So that's something to keep in mind. And that is it on Neo-Dever Trumpism. We'll keep an eye on it throughout the rest of the year. And it will be continuing on till 2024. So that's it for the main topic. Now for our two highly respected cognitive elite questions today. And as a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the cognitive elite option at Highly Respected's Substack. And that's at highly-respected.substack.com. We'll start off with the first election-related question because this deals with what we just spent nearly the last 55 minutes discussing. And this one comes from Dave. Dave asks, Scott, do you think Hillary Clinton will run in 2024? This is getting a lot of attention. I want to say that this is a sign of just pundits just trying to get traffic and get views and create discussions of something that's totally unrealistic of happening. And Hillary Clinton running in 2024, I'm going to say no for a couple of different reasons. One, when she ran in 2016, she was already not in great health. And people were already making, this is the original conspiracy theories that people were like, she's not in good health. And then one time she passed out and had to be dragged into a van and pushed into a van. And they're like, oh, this is totally normal, this. And there's just these weird things going on with her that people were noticing that she was not in 100% condition. And even today she looks worse. I mean, she's gotten fatter. She's also in her 70s. I mean, she's not looking good. She's also, there's just a type of bitterness and hatred that just cannot be hidden that's emanating from her in all these interviews, and she's just so delusional and stuff. And it's also, I don't think Democrats want to run an election where they're claiming that Trump claims that 2024 was stolen when their main candidate is going to say that 2016 was stolen. They kind of just want to pretend that they didn't say that, and move along. It's the same what they said with 2000. So they don't want to do that anymore. And the same that they're doing with Stacey Abrams in 2018. That's not what they want to. They just want to pretend that they accepted the election results and that Trump should do the same. They would much rather complain about Trump saying that he said the 2020 election is stolen rather than focus on Hillary Clinton saying the 2016 election is stolen. They just think that's bad optics. So not good health. And they don't want her either. People don't want Hillary. They like her as a martyr, but they're not exactly agitating for Hillary to come back. Democratic Party would rather have Joe Biden run because Joe Biden ran and, he got the election. He's president now. Well, Hillary Clinton didn't do that. And so they'd much rather have Biden run. Biden generates a lot less hate. Biden is more likable than Hillary. Even he may be senile. They'd still rather go with Biden than Hillary. And there's so many other candidates. I mean, they may even rather have Kamala run than Hillary. I don't know what Democrats are necessarily going to do in 2024. I think they're going to run Biden again because they don't have many great options. They can't run Kamala. The Hillary Clinton option is maybe worse than Kamala. They could go to their backbench, but they do not want to have a messy primary ahead of 2024. They just want to anoint somebody and start campaigning against Trump. I don't think they're gonna, but it definitely not the Hillary Clinton option. There's so many ridiculous options that are Biden Hogan or Biden Cheney. This is the way to get pundits are just coming with crazy stuff to get traffic and attention, and it's not serious analysis. People want Hillary Clinton back because people hate Hillary. It's more conservative media wants Hillary Clinton back because Hillary Clinton, everyone hates Hillary Clinton, and she just generates so much rage and good ratings and stuff. And having a Trump-Clinton rematch makes for a lot of interest, but people don't. It's not going to happen. I don't think Hillary Clinton is not in the shape to run again. Hillary Clinton's also not a natural politician. This is one thing. Is like Biden is energized at his old age by doing politicking, even though he's like senile and like he doesn't like tells the same stories and gets angry and stuff. But he does still like that's the stuff that energizes him, and that's what most natural politicians are. Hillary Clinton's not like that. Hillary Clinton even admitted it's like, I am not a natural politician. I've had to force myself to talk to people and do this stuff. And she actually had to run a political campaign. She's going to have to do all that stuff again when she's not in great health. She's also, likely been drinking a lot. I think there's been reports about that. And she's much more bitter and has these grievance that always comes out in her public appearances. And I just think if you look at her, like Trump is, getting to presidential form. He's lost weight. He's seeming a lot more energized, a lot more articulate than he did in his last years of his presidency. I think, he's definitely gearing up. But Hillary Clinton is like far worse condition than she was even in 2016, in which she wasn't even that great a condition. So, and the Democrats don't really want her back. They'd rather have Biden. They'd probably even rather have Kamala. And I always say that like Gavin Newsom's probably their best bet for 2024, but I think they're just going to run Biden again unless unless they really like he has like it is likely unless he has some serious medical emergency that he really can't. As long as they can push him out on the presidential trail, they're going to do that. But they're going to have challenges with that. I mean, they were saved by COVID and the fact that Biden didn't really have to interact with voters. He had only these like really closed off, rehearsed options where he got interviewed. Like people gave him softball interviews where he was like being interviewed like their grandpa's like, "Grandpa, how are you doing today?" He's like, "I'm doing just fine." And like MSNBC reporters be wide-eyed like, that's so interesting. You had ice cream today, Grandpa. That's how they interviewed him. And he didn't really have to campaign that hard. But he would have to do that in 2024. And that may be a reason where it's like, he's campaigning and he has a medical event that prevents him from running for president. I do think that is something that's likely that could happen. So maybe they do go with somebody, but I don't think it's going to be Hillary Clinton. I think that's just writers and columnists trying to generate traffic and create ideas that people are like, oh, I want to read this. And the argument for it, it's not going to happen. They'll find somebody else. So that's question number one. Now, question number two comes from Tom. Tom asks, or he was asking me about this video that I tweeted out over the weekend. It was a black guy getting arrested in New York City. He got arrested for this Burger King shooting, which is a very depressing story. I shouldn't even be chuckling about that, but a very depressing story about this guy who shot a young woman who worked at a Burger King. And when he's getting arrested, he's like, "Where are my reparations for 100 years of slavery?" And he's got like a mask and he's just yelling about racism and stuff. And I tweet this and Tom asks is like, "Do you really believe that this argument could work in court?" And what I had said in my tweet is that, this could theoretically work in court is like by just blaming your violence on slavery or racism if you shot a white person. But as I argued, it doesn't work in this case because he shot a Puerto Rican woman. So it's never going to work for this guy. He shot another non-white person whose own family couldn't even speak English. Like news reporters went out to the family and they're like, through an interpreter, and it's actually a really grim story. It's like very third worldish, like what you're learning from the story. But going to the argument, could this work in court? I don't think maybe the over the top being like, why did you murder this Puerto Rican Burger King cashier? Slavery. I don't think that's necessarily going to work, but there are some things where it could work where blacks are getting more leniency in the court. And this is what I've been talking about with like systemic racism. There is systemic racism beginning to emerge in our legal justice system, but it's in the favor of blacks. And there's already been a couple examples. There's this African immigrant serial killer in Texas. He's got a very hard to pronounce name. It's like Billy Kemmerer or something like that. I think he's from East Africa. But anyway, he is responsible for roughly like 24 murders, or he's accused of that. and they're all mostly elderly white women. He's like a home nurse who has that training, would like enter their homes and like smother them and then steal all their possessions. And they pretty much have him dead to rights because they found like these possessions in on him. They're like this jewelry belonged to this woman. Like they found him. I mean, it's like dead to rights. Like they got this guy. And they had a jury, like this happened right before the McMichaels case. I've talked about this before. And the day before, it was declared a mistrial because there was one juror, likely black, or maybe just a white liberal, who refused to believe this guy was guilty. And they're like, do you need to see any evidence? It's like, no, I've already concluded this. They're like, what about the evidence? Like, no, he's innocent. I'm voting not guilty. And they're like, we've got all this evidence. Do you need to see more? No. Done. He's not guilty. And you have to wonder, is like, that's very weird for it to happen, especially in a serial killer case where there's overwhelming evidence. And you're like, wonder what's different here. And then you're like, oh, he's black. And there's like criminal justice system. And then there's another case in Florida. And this happened, I believe, in December. This is Broward County, so this is a little bit more liberal part of Florida, not the DeSantis Codillo state. But this happened in Broward County, Florida, where there was a jury. There was this black guy on trial who was on trial for this really brutal murder where he had a home invasion of another elderly woman, like tied her up and like stabbed her to death. You know, senseless murder, totally justified for murder. But the jury refused to convict on murder. They only wanted a lesser manslaughter charge. And this came from the foreman, or it's actually the forewoman of the jury, these guys were talking, and particularly the black jurors were like, we don't want to send another black man to jail for the rest of his life. We're voting for manslaughter. We don't want to ruin his life. And this was the conclusion of the entire juror because the black jurors intimidated and pushed everyone to vote for a lenient manslaughter charge. And you know, the woman was getting up, and I think this woman is like Hispanic herself or has like a mixed race family. She gets up and she's about to deliver the verdict, and she sees that the defense is like celebrating like they just won a football game. And she was so disgusted that she's like, no, the jury has not reached a full verdict. She wanted a murder charge. And she explained like they were all like using these racist arguments, like this is racist to send him to life to jail. And like, we don't want to ruin another black man's life. And this guy committed one of the most heinous murders you could do. Now, compare that guy to what happened to McMichaels, which, you know, they did not break into somebody's home and torture an old woman to death. They simply were patrolling the neighborhood and got into a fight with a guy, and one guy's gun went off and shot him. And they're all going to jail for the rest of their lives. And it's actually fortunate that they're not getting the death penalty based on the system. And the system was like saying, you're the worst criminals ever, and you deserve the worst sentencing imaginable. It's because of white people killed a black guy. And this would happen in any other case. And I think now what you're going to see is you're going to see the reverse of what, you know, Black Lives Matter advocates and others have been saying for years. They're like, oh, the justice system puts innocent black men in jail for years and years. And really what's happening is they're now getting released without bail. They're getting like slaps on the wrist. They're getting, you know, joke sentences for serious crimes. And this is now going to be the future, especially if it's a jury trial where they have blacks on the jury. And the most famous, this case I always bring up, it's from South Carolina. I always bring this up. This happened actually in 2017, but the verdict wasn't reached until I think it was the spring or early summer, where this 77-year-old volunteer fire chief was just sitting in his car on a Sunday morning in August 2017. So probably bright and early. There's not a lot of darkness. You know, he's just sitting in his car, not a dangerous situation you're expecting at like 9 a.m. in the morning. Black guy approaches his car. Apparently, the 77-year-old volunteer fire chief, white guy, made some sudden movement, and it scared the black guy so much that he emptied his gun into the guy, killing him. And the jury found him not guilty because they believed his story that he got frightened by a 77-year-old man. The dude, black guy, was like 30 and approached his car at 9 a.m. in the morning. And somehow he was the one frightened, and it was his right to shoot this guy up. And there's another story of a guy shot at Minneapolis police during the George Floyd riots. He was found, he was acquitted of I think it was like attempted murder or whatever charge they had on him because they claimed he was acting in self-defense. And there's a couple of other cases where there's a black guy who I'm forgetting his name, but all the libertarians got mad when I defended no-knock raids for this, and like police, is that he got acquitted for shooting at police who charged into his home, and they said that's self-defense. So now blacks can even shoot at police. So what we're seeing is like systemic racism in favor of blacks in the justice system. So we could see cases where a black guy commits a horrible crime and they just claim that like, oh, I've been so traumatized by slavery and racism that I did this. And they could theoretically get a light charge or a light sentence, or, you know, have charges thrown out doing this. This is how our system operates. And there's already blacks who will like commit murders or commit violent acts, and they'll just say, this person called me the N-word, in hopes that they'll get off. And there's several cases of that. The most recent one is this case in New York City where this Asian hostess asked for the vaccine cards of these blacks traveling. Of course, vaccine mandates are bad, and she shouldn't be asking for vaccine cards, no matter if they're black or white or whatever. And the blacks got pissed and beat the shit out of her. And then the blacks like lied and said this woman called her the N-word. And then the Asian woman's so horrified, they're like, I've never called anyone the N-word. But they always like claim that they either got called the N-word and that's why they had to commit a brutal murder, or that just racism has just so traumatized them that they had to act out violently. And that's the system we operate in now. And that's what we're going to see in the court system. But it's not going to work in this case because it's a non-white on non-white violence, so it won't work. But if it happened to a white guy, we'd have to see if that works, and we'll probably find an example this year or maybe next year, very soon, of somebody using this legal defense, and we'll have to see if it works. Unfortunately, I think it may work. So that is kind of a black pill to work on, but I think the one white pill about that is that I do think it makes people realize how effed up the system is and how the system is becoming increasingly anti-white. And it's good that people like Donald Trump and other public figures are paying attention towards it. And the number one cable news host, Tucker Carlson, also pays attention to it and gets his audience to notice. So I don't like to leave people on black pills, so that is something, a white pill, is that it will increase awareness of the problems we face. So on that note, I'm going to end this Highly Respected. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we will be back with a great IQ supplement this week. We should have a guest on, and it should be a cultural topic, so hopefully you guys enjoy that. So until next time, stay respected.